So guys, this is AUDUSD. So we're going to also have a quick review in the AUDUSD pair based on the weekly focus analysis that was dropped last week. We also started from the monthly time frame since we saw ourselves in the new year 2025. We wanted to see what happened last month of December in 2024. And what we saw, we have this sell side liquidity as the established next drawn liquidity we identified. And we saw this monthly candle that was created. And so we anticipated to see more push of price to the upside before we can see the bearish continuation since we identified the monthly fair value gap from the monthly time frame. So this is our next draw on liquidity, the sell side liquidity. So we drop to the weekly time frame to further establish our confluences and our zones. So let's get to the weekly time frame. So what we identify from the weekly time frame is within the monthly fair value gap we saw established, we saw the weekly fair value gap also. So we anticipated to see the push of price into the weekly fair value gap, which is also within the monthly fair value gap, so that we can establish a bearish continuation to the downside because AUD/USD is heavily bearish to the downside. And now we can see how price have delivered to the downside and took out sell side liquidity, which was our anticipation. So what then did we see in far lower time frame in the weekly fair value gap, which is in confluence to the monthly fair value gap? So we dropped to the daily time frame, and also within the daily time frame, we can see that we have the daily fair value gap, which is also in confluence to the weekly fair value gap, and also within the zone of the monthly fair value gap. So if we're anticipated to see further push of price, then price should respect this fair value gap because this is a strong confluence, weekly fair value gap plus the daily fair value gap within the monthly fair value gap. So within the fair value gap, we identify a zone in the 4-hour time frame. So let's drop to the 4-hour time frame. And what we can see in the 4-hour time frame is that we identify this order block. So we can see AUD/USD have been trending to the downside. So we can clearly see how it has been a bearish movement to the downside, and we had this impulse. So you can see that within the weekly fair value gap, in confluence to the monthly fair value gap, we identify the 4-hour order block also within the zone of the daily fair value gap. So you can see we establish a strong confluence also in the AUD/USD pair. So we have this displacement. Price gave us a pullback. Price further went down and took out the slow. So price was trading to the upside. This is the next draw on liquidity. So where's the sponsorship zone above the next draw on liquidity? We can see clearly that it is this order block, and we can see how price returned to mitigate that order block. Price took out the buy side liquidity. We can clearly see here in the 4-hour time frame, price took out the buy side liquidity, and now we can see the mitigation of that order block, and then price fell to the downside. So we can see there is a fair value gap left here. So how price returned and mitigated the fair value gap in confluence with the order block and the displacement to the downside. So from the 4-hour time frame, we can just go straight to the 15-minute time frame and establish our entries. And you can also utilize the 15-minute time frame and drop to as low as the 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute time frame to also establish your confluence and your entry zones. But we are just going to look at the 15-minute time frame for just this quick review. So let's drop to the 15-minute time frame. So here in the 15-minute time frame, since we've established all necessary confluences we need to see in the markets, and we've identified our point of interest, and we can see strong confluences in those points of interest. Now we can see this is price reaction within our point of interest. Now we can see how price reacted at the 4-hour order block, which is the daily fair value gap, the weekly fair value gap, or within the monthly fair value gap. Now you can see the massive displacements. I've always stressed this to the mentorship students that you want to see a displacement. You want to see a displacement once price mitigates your higher time frame point of interest. And clearly here we can identify that displacement. So we can see the model we have here is that price broke structure, give us the displacement leading to the market structure shift. So once we identify our next draw on liquidity, when price is returning to the order block or other sponsorship zone, could be the fair value gap that price actually created before, leading to a market structure shift. So now what we can see is we have this buy side liquidity, and now we can see the return of price, how price took out the buy side's liquidity. Now we see price return to the order block. So this is the last up close candle before the bearish movements of price to the downside. But what we can see is that this candle mitigated the order block. So here's where we have the fair value gap. So we can see how price return mitigated that zone, filled up the fair value gap, and then we have the displacement of price to the downside. So I just gave us a very quick review and the concept of our entry models. So guys, see you in the next video. Cheers and God bless you all.